Hello and welcome back, everybody. Kevin here along with Jerry.
Hi, everyone.
Jerry actually sounds pretty good. That his voice is nice and strong, although he tells me that he's not feeling all that great. So a special thanks to Jerry showing up when at the moment he'd probably rather be in bed, and I don't blame him for that. Um, we actually thought about postponing this kind of last minute, but Jerry said absolutely not. Let's get it done. So with
Yep.
that, we will do our absolute best. If you could all, Jerry's got the keys as far as the ability to um, field questions, etc. But if you could, just type in the box, let us know that you can see currently the demo website that we're going to be building through this process, and you can hear our voices. I would appreciate it.
Yeah, if you can hear both of us so far, loud and clear. Everything's good.
Cool.
Someone just emailed me some chicken soup.
Nice. Very nice.
There you go.
Okay, cool. Well, we're already at
Um,
11:02. Yeah, did you
we
want
are
to say something?
recording. I want to say we're recording.
Yes, we are recording. And we're going to do our best to get this section of the webinar in by sometime tomorrow, if at all possible, along with the PSD and the web source or the website source files, the ones that we basically go through today, the first kind of section of them. So I'm going to do something that you're not supposed to do as a presenter. One of the things that you are taught if you do any amount of presenter training is to admit nervousness or fear. But if you know me, I don't exactly go along with most convention. Um, I'm excited about this. I think it's going to be really helpful and beneficial to you, but I'll be honest, I'm a little bit nervous only because I've never attempted to teach this specific content before. I've done a lot of preparation work prior to this to try to make sense of it, to try to give it to you in an orderly flow, but quite honestly, we're going to be all over the map. We're going to be inside of Photoshop, and I realize some of you have some Photoshop experience, some of you have none. That presents all sorts of challenges. We're going to be talking about new third-party things like the 960 grid system and what that means. We're going to be talking about CSS reset code and what that means. We're going to be kind of a little bit all over the place, but I'm hoping that if I've done my job properly that we'll build this thing in an orderly fashion and hopefully we'll bring it all together and make it make sense. That's our goal. So with that, I think if you'll just do your best to try to follow along with me, write down any questions you have, and make sure that you bring them up towards the end, or if you find something pressing that you type it in, and maybe Jerry can handle it for you as we go along. That's probably the best thing we can do. So with that, let's go. We are looking at the actual coded PSD. This is the PSD that has been fully coded. It is a live web page. And we'll just talk about it for just a second before we jump into Photoshop. So it is a fixed width layout. We're not going to be talking about fluid layouts that change as a browser gets narrower or wider. Definitely that's kind of the next level up is fluid layouts, and then above that even now is something called adaptive, and there's another word for it. Jerry, what's the other word for it? It starts with an R.
Responsive.
Responsive. Is it
Or
responsive?
repulsive in some cases.
So the newer fluid layouts they refer to as either responsive or adaptive, and those are like way complex compared to what we're doing. We're basically building a website that has a fixed width. The width of this doesn't change, and if I were to reduce my browser size, it would not start changing the layout of the content in order to fit the browser. For desktop design, this is perfectly acceptable. There's nothing wrong with a fixed width layout. There are obviously some limitations to it. You don't want to serve up this website for your mobile site, which of course is why there are mobile site platforms like our own Mobile Web Pro and many others. Mobile site design, just as a quick aside, needs to have a fluid layout just because you have absolutely no idea how your content's going to be viewed. By that I mean it could be viewed on a smartphone, like an Android or an iPhone, and even in that you've got issues, because if they have the content, or the phone rather, in the vertical mode where you're looking at the content in a portrait view, it views one way, but as soon as they turn it and the screen flips, now it's in widescreen view, and you want the content to size. So we're not going to be talking about any of that stuff today. We're only dealing with a fixed width layout. Looking at the coding, we have some images, obviously these icon images at the top. We have some links. You'll see that the mobile site is a link, and gets an underline rather when I hover over it. I don't think, yeah, actually we have the email addresses linked. You can do that or not, it's up to you. Phone number. You'll see in the main navigation area, as I roll over them, they become blue, so there's a different kind of a hover effect happening in regards to these text links. There's a logo. If I hover over it, you'll see it changes to the cursor changes to the hand icon, letting you know that that image is linked back to the index page, which is typical. There's a tagline. We've got our main body, all of our main content, which is in here. This gets to the first discussion of creating basically containers within containers and floating them. So this content over here, the main content, is what's called floated to the left. This sidebar content is then, it's also floated left, which you would think it would be floated to the right, but it's when you float elements, basically, you allow them to slide up alongside of each other, such that if I added content to this sidebar area, it could grow in its height, but stay in this container area. Same thing with the main content. So we'll get into this, but we're probably not going to get into the content layout until next session, just because there's so much to cover just in what we have to do today. We've got some images. Obviously, the images now are styled interestingly. The images are getting a gray border placed around them by CSS. They're also, this image is floated to the left. This image is floated to the right. So we'll talk about floats and how that all works out as part of this process. We've got a kind of a nice styled testimonial area down here that is currently coded to be dynamic in height. So if there was one testimonial or client review, etc., that was taller than another, it would automatically grow in its height. And then down here we've got a full-featured footer with 3 individual footer columns, and you even got a contact form, and you'll see that there's some neat styling in regards to CSS as I hover and or even click over them. There's basically 3 states: the default state, the hover state, and the on focus or the focus state when you actually click inside of one of the input areas. Lastly, there's some copyright information, some text links, the ability for you to label the design as your own, and then some social icons. We will be getting to all of this through these 2 parts. However, we've got to walk before we run, so let's get that done first. Please note, one of the other reasons I'm slightly nervous is because GoToWebinar takes up a significant amount of resources from a computer, and so does Photoshop, and having them both running at the same time typically isn't a good idea, but there's no way around it for this training. So we're just going to hope that my connection is really strong and my computer runs good and everything works right. So with that, let's open up Photoshop. Okay. Can everybody see the very complex or very hard to understand PSD inside of Photoshop, Jerry?
I can see it, and they're all saying yes.
Okay.
Nice
so,
grid.
Yeah, thanks.
Can I make one statement
Yes.
here?
Yes.
We're working on an HTML site. This is not a WordPress theme or something like that. So getting some confusion.
Okay. Well, yeah. Let me point that out then. Obviously, this looks. If we go back to Firefox, this looks obviously especially with the content, probably what you're used to in regards to a WordPress theme. You know, we've got a welcome statement up here. We've got the term posts being used, etc. I do intend to code this into a full working WordPress theme, which is why, you know, I started this off this way. But yeah, we are not building a WordPress theme. There won't be any PHP integration into what we do. That's way more advanced. Content really is content. So just because it says recent posts, or we're looking at stuff that looks like it's WordPress content, just understand that this could say anything. This could have just said, you know, site navigation or anything else. So I am building it with the intelligence, basically, knowing that I plan to code it as a WordPress theme. But like Jerry said, we're not getting into WordPress theme coding. We'll talk about the use of WordPress and, you know, customizing and tweaking things later, but in this, we're basically just getting into coding this into an HTML web page. All right, so back to Photoshop we go. I realize that right now this is really hard to understand. All of these light kind of bluish lines are referred to inside of Photoshop as guides, and there's a lot of really good reasons to use them. You're going to see kind of how a lot of these are built here in just a second, but I just want you to know, if you have Photoshop, I think Photoshop Elements does have the same command inside of the PC. Control H basically toggles your guides on and off. So I'll go ahead and turn them off for the moment just so you can kind of see the content, but Control H on a PC at least, and there's, I'm sure, a different code for you Mac users, but and it might be Apple H, I'm just not sure, has the ability to toggle the guides on and off. So we just kind of need to give, I guess, a quick tour of, of Photoshop. I'm not going to get too in depth, otherwise we'd be here for hours just on this one point alone. But on the right-hand side over here, I've got the layers window open, and when you get a chance to open the PSD, either through like a trial copy of Photoshop or Photoshop Elements, etc., just to look at it, you may or may not see the layers palette or any of this information here on the right-hand side. You find these through View, and actually it's through Window. So you go through Window first, and you'll notice that you have all of these windows that you have the ability to take a look at. If you look at any of these that are checked on the left, you'll notice that the checked ones are actually being displayed to me. So you see that the layers window is active because of the check mark. And if I wanted to turn it off, I could simply click it again, and you would see that the layers window, or palette as they refer to it, is now off. Well, we need that, so I'll turn layers back on. That's basically how you operate with those. Each PSD that you look at is going to be built differently because each graphic designer obviously works independently. So it's really impossible for me to tell you how you're going to, what it's going to look like for you when you open it up. I can tell you what this one looks like, obviously, because we built it. Right here, if I click on each one of these areas, because you see the folder icon right here next to each of these, all the way down to footer, these are what's referred to as groups. So there's individual layers. You can think of like a layered cake, basically, that are grouped together. This eye icon over here to the far left, and if you didn't know what that is, it's basically a representation of a human eyeball, has the ability to turn on and off content. So for instance, this group right here that's labeled or titled by us, the header, the topmost area, if I click the eyeball, you'll see this area go away. All right, so all of the graphics that are controlling that area are inside of this group. Same thing with the next area down, and then lower down. There's the main content, there's the sidebar content, lower on the page, there's the testimonials, Lower on the page, there's the content background, which is that white area. You see that went away. Lower on the page is the gradient under the header, which is, let's see, which is this area right here, this shadowed area. See that goes away. Towards the bottom again, now we have the footer in a group. And it might have been hard to see that nice looking shadow that we built underneath the page content area, but you can see it more easily when we get rid of the footer. It's there. It adds a little pop to it anyway, but the coloring is pretty close. If this were a different color background, it would be easy for you to do that. Make this red, that shadow would pop out a little bit more. And then lastly, we've got outside of a group. It's no longer in a group here anymore. It's just on a layer by itself. You'll see that I've labeled this E7, 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 BG for background color. The color that is right here in the main body background is a very light gray, and the hexadecimal or HTML color value is E7, E7, E7. If I turn that off, of course we get white. And then the last is the actual background. This icon over here tells you that it's locked, so you don't need to worry about this. All of the main content for this PSD is found between this top header group and this background color. There is one other thing that I haven't shown you at the very top, and you'll see that the eyeball is off, which is why it's not displaying to you. This is part of what's called the 960 grid system. And I'm not going to talk about it in depth, but I do want to make mention of it. I do want to show you where you can learn more about it. I do want to show you where you can get a lot of awesome free elements for you to learn more about and play with. And that's kind of this. If I go ahead and turn it on, you're going to see that we get a number of these kind of light red or pinkish type vertical stripes. What this is, I didn't create this. I actually just, it's a free download from the actual creator of the 960 grid system. So I'll take you over to the website there in just a minute. But I do want to talk about a little bit about why it's used. 960 is a pixel width dimension. This is 960 pixels. Came about really because almost every desktop computer, even most laptop computers anymore, have a screen resolution of at least 1024, 1024 pixels in width. There are very, very few machines out there anymore that are the 800 by 600s. I mean, a really small percentage. They exist, but the percentage is very, very small. So basically a lot of web developers came up with an understanding of, well, what kind of a width could we create fixed width websites around and ensure that most of the time the viewer would have the ability to see it perfectly on their machine, so on their screen. So 960 basically became selected for a couple of reasons. Number one, it was smaller than the 1024 screen width, and the second reason it was selected because it was perfectly divisible. So here's what each one of these red bands basically represent, and you can see that over here it says the 16 COL for column grid. If we counted these out, you would see that there are 16 of these in its width. There are 20 pixels of space basically between each one of these columns, and there's also in the 960 grid, there's also I think 10 pixels of space typically to the right and the left. So basically if you kind of see how the content falls, if you look at the width of this sidebar, you'll see that it falls perfectly in line with those two columns. This sizing then was chosen not randomly, but because of the 960 grid system. I basically just created this sidebar to fall right along one of the columns. The same thing over here with the main content. You can see that the left-hand image and the right-hand image basically follow along those vertical lines as well. It's just basically an easy way for you to be able to chop up content and know mathematically how to lay stuff out. Same thing, for example, down here. You'll notice that the testimonial area falls within it, and if these bars continued to go all the way down, you'd also see that the footer content areas, these 3 blocks now I've chosen, and it's kind of hard to see with the business information because the content doesn't flow full width, but this container is inside of those exact areas too. Now, this I'll tell you that we used this grid system when we built the layout, but what we didn't do really is we didn't use their corresponding CSS. Now, this discussion gets relatively complex, and I can't go deep into it. Otherwise, probably A, I'll lose everybody, and or many people at least, and B, it would take too long. But I do want to talk just a little bit about it, and we'll go over to the actual website here and show you what I mean. So we're back online. It's very easy to find the website. It is 960.gs is the actual home page for the 960 grid system. So if you head over to 960.gs sometime soon, this is what you're going to see. You're going to see that there's this big old download button here. You'll also see that you have the ability to download from this link here. Well, what are you going to download? Well, there's CSS actually pre-written. There's a sketch paper for the 960 grid system if you're the type of person that wants to sketch on a pad. And there's also templates, it says, for a whole bunch of things, including GIMP, including Illustrator, including Photoshop, etc. I am using the template basically for Photoshop. That's that layer that you're seeing inside of Photoshop is the free downloadable template straight from the 960 grid system. Basically what you need to know is, and this website here is laid out in the 960 grid system, all of these container areas all fall within one of the and you can mix and match, right? You could have a container that was just the width of one of those red things, or 2 or 3 or 4. You can mix and match. So right here in this area you see that it's broken down into 3 columns. Down here below it, it's broken into 2, etc. Also note that there are not all 960 grid systems are broken into 16 columns. The 12 column layout is probably more popular than 16. These are individual examples of real websites that were built using the 960 grid system, and it's telling you the actual URL, it's telling you whether they use 12 or 16 column, etc. And if you click the Show Grid button, it will actually put the lines over the image for you so you can see basically how the content was broken out. And just doing that alone will give you a whole lot of food for thought in regards to using this. Here's one that was done with 16, similar to ours. You notice that obviously since the width is the same, the width is still 960 pixels total, that obviously these individual columns are narrower than the 12 column layout. So it really just depends upon your layout, which, whether you use 12 or 16. I will say, since the question then comes up, well, why did you use 16 as opposed to 12? I honestly can't remember the specifics as to why I did it, but if you're going to be breaking down stuff symmetrically and you know that you want 3 column layouts, then the 12 column layout can be better, because obviously 12 is divisible by, 12 divided by 3 equals 4. So you basically would get, like in this one, of course he doesn't have any. Let me go back and find one that has 3 columns. Let's see. Here's one. So here's 3 columns. They look like they're probably equivalent, and it's a 12-column layout. So if we do this, basically you can see here now is that this column here takes up 4 of the individual grid columns, 1, 2, 3, 4. So does the next, and so does the next. So if you're looking to basically divide your content into 3 symmetrical areas, then the 12-column grid makes sense, because of course 16 isn't evenly divisible by 16, divisible by 16. Anyway, so for free, you can not only get the templates and the sketch paper, but you can also get the CSS. Well, what does that mean? Basically, it's a framework, and it's hard to explain until you just go play around with it, but it's free. Go play around with it. They've already done all of the CSS work to basically divide all of the containers into just about every width imaginable within the grid system, such that you can just use the CSS as is without having to actually create it yourself. Just drop it into your HTML file, and it'll automatically lay out the content to fall right along with the grid system. I don't know that I can explain it better than that without going deeper, and like I said, we just really don't have the time or the ability to get deeper into the 960 grid system, but I wanted to make mention as to what it is. More than likely, as you go through your web development career, you're going to hear people talk about the 960 grid system, and I wanted you to know what it is and know where to go learn more about it. Also, they've now created a new JavaScript file. You can see it says adaptive CSS. This gets even more complex, but when we were talking about fluid layouts, responsive, I think Jerry said, is the other word. Adaptive is they mean the same thing. Go take a look at the adaptive CSS when you get a chance. It's complex, but it's pretty cool. I'm just now starting to actually educate myself about responsive and adaptive layouts. So, all right, like I said, we're going to be a little bit all over the place, but that's the 960 grid system, kind of a little bit of the intelligence behind why it's used. Back to Photoshop we go. All right, so when you are looking at a graphic layout that you basically the end result or the end goal is to code it to become a live web page, there's a number of things that you have to look at in order to make intelligent decisions as to how you're going to code it. The first thing you need to know is you want to use as few images as is humanly possible. That's for 2 reasons, or probably for more than that, but for 2 main reasons. Number 1, obviously, each image has a corresponding file size. The larger the image, the more high resolution the image, obviously the higher the file size is. It takes longer to load an image that has a higher file size. That's the first thing. Obviously, it's also taking up more bandwidth. So there's actually 3. There's the bandwidth issue, especially if you have limited bandwidth from your hosting account. You really have to be cautious about using too much image resources. But there's also the speed of load time now. Obviously, it affects the user experience. Users don't want to sit around and wait for images to load. In addition to that, it's not good for your SEO. The faster loading your page is, the better off you're going to be from a search engine optimization standpoint. So in addition to that, in addition to the file size issue, the load issue, and the bandwidth issue, is another thing called HTTP requests. And maybe Jerry wants to chime in here, as he knows more of the technical background, but from my understanding, Jerry, unless you just want to correct me, basically the HTTP request is just a request between the browser and the server. It has to go, the two have to communicate basically each time a new image is called out. And the more times that process has to happen, the slower your page load. Is that?
Yeah, that's basically it. Every time it needs to get another piece that's separate, it has to go out and make another request and then get a response and download that. And it just keeps adding more and more to your time to download. So you want to try to keep it minimal. Plus, images are handled a little differently than regular HTML. For like when it's laying out, it sometimes if it doesn't have the right placeholder or whatever, it just makes the page take a lot longer. So you don't want to have a lot of images if you can help it, because it would grab the HTML all at once, for example, as opposed to grabbing each individual image 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, thank you. So again, the end result is basically, while images are the pretty side of the web, there are ways to build nice looking things that don't necessarily need to be images. If you can build your layout to have the look that you want, but avoid images, generally speaking, it's a good idea to do so. Well, you say, well, how do you do that? How do you, build the image or build the site to look like this image but not be an image? And here's kind of the reason why we created this PSD the way we did, because we wanted to teach. We wanted to be a good teaching tool. This very topmost band, this horizontal band that goes behind the mobile site, the phone number, and the email address, it's just a flat color. It's a really dark blue. Because it's just a flat color, there's absolutely no reason. I could slice it as an image and force it to repeat horizontally or repeat in the x-axis, but doing so would be unintelligent. It's unintelligent for two reasons. Number one, it would increase the file size. It would cause another HTTP request. And number three, if I decided, or my client decided, you know what, I really don't like that exact color, I'd like it a little shade lighter or a little shade darker, or maybe I want it red, you have to go back and create and slice a new image. If this area is colored basically through CSS, and it can easily be done that way because it's just a flat color, then when your client asks you to make that change, no longer do you have to go back to creating an image. You simply just change a value inside of the CSS file, click update, and voila, it's live. So it's better for every reason. Sometimes, however, it's not possible to do that through CSS. Now, through CSS3, they are getting much more fancy in what can be done, including like putting drop shadows on text and rounded corners, and now they're even getting into like three-dimensional elements and more. But we're not going to get into the high-end stuff, because a lot of stuff, or a lot of browsers right now, don't fully support CSS3, like they don't fully support HTML5. So we're going to talk about the more standard items through CSS, the ones that actually work in the real world right now. This area here, the main header area, it's kind of like a dark granite gray to black. It's hard for you to see probably on your screen, but it's got like a granite pebbly type texture to it. It's not consistent. The texture is random, and as a result of the randomness of the pattern, and again we did this on purpose, you can't slice this image and repeat it horizontally or repeat it in the x-axis, because doing so would make it look really horrible. That random pattern would no longer line up, and it would look very, very bad. So this is an area, and you just have to kind of know this while you're looking through your image to slice, and that's why we started this whole discussion, is making intelligent decisions when you go to slice something. Is that when you look at this, you should say, well, is that something, is that texture, is that pattern something that is linear? Is it the same top to bottom? Is it consistent left to right? If it is, we could take a thin slice vertically of this image, and then through CSS tell it to repeat it horizontally, and that would do a couple things. It would lower the file size, and it does not cause another HTTP request. As a result of that, the browser then tiles the image horizontally. It saves file space. It renders fast, and we're going to do that here when we talk about this shadow background. However, for this main background, we can't do that. We're actually going to take this across as one large image. So the next question is, well, how large should the image be, left or right? Realistically, you may be, depending upon whether you created the PSD yourself or not, if you got the PSD from someone else, you're going to be limited to what they created. A lot of web designers still create their PSDs a maximum of 1600 pixels wide. The current flat screen monitor that I'm using myself right now is 1600 pixels in width, which is why that started to be used. Right now, as far as I'm aware of standard monitors, we're not talking about like TV monitors that you can view a website on, but standard computer monitors, the max resolution in width is 1920 pixels in width. And when you get a hold of this PSD, you'll notice that that is exactly the width that we coded this or created this image in. It's 1920 pixels wide. And we're going to talk a little bit about repeating this image, even though it's going to be one big image, and you'll see how that works here as we go along. So again, with the understanding, we have this top header section that is kind of this dark blue, and it's flat. It's a flat color. So we're going to code this to be just a CSS color. Down here in this image, we've got a thin line that goes across this whole thing, and then we've got this random. We're going to slice this out as one large image. Underneath this now, we've got kind of a white line, and then we've got this kind of a medium gray to light gray gradient, as it's referred to. Basically, it just transitions from medium gray to light gray. Now this might be hard for you to see or understand if you're new to this, but I can tell you that this gradient is linear. By that I mean it is the exact same left to right, top to bottom. We're going to take a very thin slice of this image and then tell it through CSS to repeat it horizontally, such that we can lower our file size and speed up our load times. Next, coming down a little bit more, we've got this white container area. Now, I said just a minute ago, through CSS now, you do have the ability to start putting radiuses or curves on borders, but this is not what we're going to do. There's a problem with doing that because some of the older browsers, like IE7, I'm not sure even about IE8, but IE7 does not support. Actually, I don't think even IE9. Jerry, does even IE9 support border radiuses?
I believe it does.
IE9 does. Does 8?
Yeah, but see one problem is each of the browsers support them differently.
Yeah.
So even Firefox supports it differently than Chrome and Safari, and IE supports it a different way. So it gets to be a problem.
Right. So in regards to border radiuses for Firefox and Chrome and Safari, just a quick aside, the Chrome and Safari, both of those browsers, they use an engine called WebKit, W-E-B-K-I-T. There's what they call vendor-specific CSS for the WebKit browser, and there's vendor-specific CSS for the Firefox browser. You can use those basically for those browsers to cause radiuses to happen through CSS for Firefox, Chrome, and Safari. The only downside is, of course, Internet Explorer users, many of them are not going to see them. They're going to see everything as square-cornered. In addition to that, if you care at all, I personally don't. I care about validating my HTML, and I take a look at my CSS to make sure that it's properly coded. But I don't care about CSS validation for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is the validator, it does not recognize any vendor-specific CSS. So as soon as you start putting specific CSS for the Mozilla, for the Firefox browser, or for the WebKit browsers, it'll automatically cause your CSS to not validate, because according to the W3C, that's not part of the CSS standard. So just something to be aware of. Anyway, going back to this document, we're not going to create this through CSS, we're going to create it through images. And we're going to use 3 images to build this area. We're going to slice out a section of just the top. We're going to take a teeny thin slice of the middle area, because this middle area is it's exact vertically. So over here, we're talking about taking a thin slice and repeating it horizontally. With this background area, we're actually going to take a thin slice this direction and we're going to repeat it vertically. Lower down on the page, we've got the bottom section, which is unique. This is going to be an individual slice. And then let's take a look down here. The footer area we purposely built with the understanding that we didn't want to build it with images at all. So this top area here, what we're calling footer, the entire area is the footer. This is the footer 1 area, and this is the footer 2 area. And we'll get into that when we go start coding things here in just a few minutes. This is a flat color, and we can style this through nothing more than CSS. This bottom area is also a flat color. The only interesting thing about it is this kind of light line that goes across the entire width. But that's okay too, because through CSS we can tell it to have a border top, specify a thickness, specify a color, specify its type. In this case it's a solid line, and style that line through CSS as well. So this area here, the entire footer area, can be styled through CSS. We'll need 3 images, like I said, for the background, this white area. We're going to need an image for the main header, and we're going to need this repeating image for the shadow. We're also going to include the little white line that you see is going to be part of this repeating image, because we're going to repeat it horizontally. That'll work out perfectly as well. So at the moment, I am going to disregard all of these extra images. We're going to disregard the icons, we're going to disregard the logo, we're going to disregard the content. Doing so would just take far too long in session number 1. We're really looking to build just the main container of this website today. So let's go to Firefox and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Then we'll come back over to Photoshop and we'll start slicing it. So again, our end result when we're completely finished will be this nice, beautiful working website. But here's what we're going to do to start. We're actually going to start, and we're going to start with this. This is beautiful, isn't it? This is really just nothing more than just the light gray color, that E7, E7, E7 color used to style basically the entire body area of our page. We're then going to build it to where we add the top header area. Again, the top section through CSS, the bottom section through an image. After we finish that, we're going to add the main body area and the repeating shadow. And after we do that, we're then going to add the bottom section of the container page and the entire footer. And if I do my job right, by the time we finish, we should have this basic layout, and if we have a little bit more time, we'll take it a little bit further, but that's basically my goal, is to show you how to code this entire section, slicing it from the PSD and then coding it in HTML. Okay? So going back to Photoshop, you basically see that we need a couple of things. I'm going to go ahead and open up a notepad document, even though I've already done the code and I don't need it. I just want to show you kind of how I would do this. So the header area, the header area is going to be this entire area to include both the CSS color and the actual header image. The footer area, so this is basically the top we're going to call header 1 and the bottom we're going to call header 2. The bottom area is going to be the same. We've got the entire area is the footer, and it's going to be segmented into two parts, the taller section, footer 1, and the shorter section, footer 2. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to figure out, okay, what kind of height do I have in this area? And I need to know that value when I code it. I also need to know what this color is. So through Photoshop, there's basically two ways to kind of go about this. The first way is over here. There's the color picker. There's a foreground color and a background color. That's why there's these two square swatches. I'm going to click on the topmost color, this kind of corally pink color, and you'll see that it opens up the color picker window right here. When it opens up, please note this: you don't want only web colors to be checked, because if you do, it's going to force it into what's referred to as a web safe color, and it's not going to give you the real value that you're looking for. You want the exact color value. Web safe colors was important when monitors could only display 256 colors, etc. But now that they can display over 16 million colors, you don't have to worry about web safe colors anymore. You can use any color that you'd like. So untick this box, and then when I hover over content now, it's very hard to see probably, but there's a little eyedropper, which is the color picker. And as I hover over different areas, I could pick different colors. Well, I want to know what this color is that the designers use for this header 1 area. So I put the eyedropper over here and I click, and you'll see that it's now giving me the actual color value, the actual hexadecimal color value for this top area. So that's the first value that I need. I'm going to copy that out. We'll paste it. We'll say OK. We'll paste it into my notepad. And I'm just going to say header, 1 color is going to be this. That's the color that we're using. And I also want to know what the height is of that particular area. And that's basically done like this. First off, it looks like my guides are messed up, so we'll reset those. And let's talk about guides here for just a second. These rulers over here, both vertically and horizontally, are called rulers. And if you go to view, you need to make sure that your rulers are on. So turning them off will get rid of the rulers. View rulers will turn them back on. These dimensions I have set up in pixels. Websites are generally coded in pixel width dimensions. It's what's standard for web development, so you want them in pixels. If you see that your values are something else, if you right-click on the ruler, you'll see that it's going to give you what dimensions. I can look at the ruler in inches or centimeters, etc. I want it in pixels. So that's already set properly. Right here on the left-hand ruler, you'll see it says 0. And I've obviously done some work previously to this PSD, and I reset the 0 line here. By default, your 0 is going to be your top left corner. It's going to be 0 horizontally and 0 vertically. Well, we need to set it back that way so I can find the height value for this section. And how you do that is right here. To the left of the ruler, the very top left, there's a little, like a corner that has no values in it, and double-clicking in that area with your left mouse resets the ruler. So you can see, and let me scroll back to the left, right here. You can see that now the left-hand side of our layout is at the 0 point, and the top area over here is set to the 0 point. So that's basically how you reset the ruler. So the next thing is, well, what we need to do is figure out the height for this area, and oops, I wanted to go the other way. If I shove the image over and look at it, it looks like that area is 50 pixels in height. If I want to, get a better view of it, I can click the magnifying lens over here. You can see there's a plus in there now. If I click in it, you'll see that we blow this image up, and I can get a better idea in regards to the actual height for this area. And this area is, it looks to be 50 pixels in height. So I'll add that to this document. I honestly think I coded it at 55, but it is 50. So that's the first bit of information I need to know to code that area. Is I just want a band of color, and I want it to be this color, and I want it to be basically 50 pixels in height. The next thing is, well, we know that this, and let me, I guess, make one other mention. When you have the magnifying lens up and it says plus, in order to make it go down for the PC, you hold the Alt key down. You'll see that it switches to a minus, and then I could left click and it starts to reduce in magnification. So the next thing we need to do is we need to slice out this full width header image and make that basically ready for our site. So let me turn back on the guides. It's going to get very confusing here in just a second. But turning on the guides gives us an ability to slice. So now that I have the guides on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of them. Not by just toggling them, but actually clearing them so we can start anew. So I'm going to clear all the guides. So now the guides are off, not just through toggling, but they're actually gone. And I'm going to save. Let's see. Yeah, save the file real quick. Okay, so now that our guides are off, we want to set a couple of guides so that we can use them for slicing. And like I said earlier, I want to pick up this this thin line on the top, but I'm not going to pick up the thin line on the bottom. I'm actually going to pick up the thin line in the next vertical slice. And again, it's just personal preference. I could slice this whole thing out and include the white line in the main image as well as the line above. It's really just a personal preference. I'm just showing you something for demonstration purposes. So what we want to do is go back to View, and we have rulers on, which of course we can see over here. But you also see this other thing that's called Snap. When Snap is on, Photoshop is trying to stop at certain ruler values, and we will turn it on, and you'll see how it makes sense to turn it on, but right now I don't want it on, I want it off. I want the ability to move the ruler, or the guide rather, infinitely, such that I can move it just a breath if I need to. So I'm going to turn Snap off, and here's how we get the rulers. I'm going to click the topmost selection up here, the Move tool, and I'm going to basically just left click in the top ruler, and I'm going to drag. And you're going to see what's going to happen is it's going to give me a horizontal guide. And I want to position that guide right in the place where I want to do my slicing. Oops, I want to go up. So if you see now, you'll see that thin line. I'm trying to get my new guide right up to it, right there. The same thing happens in the bottom area. I want to pull another guide down. Again, I just left click in the ruler and I pull down, and I want to get a guide right there, making sure that I get the color and not necessarily the white. So I've got a guide now right where I want them, top and bottom. I'm going to go ahead and reduce the magnification so you can see this a little bit better. And I'll reposition the window. And you'll see that now that we just have those two guides, all of the other guides are turned off. And if you look as it flows off the graphic, maybe you can see it a little bit better. That bottom one's a little hard to see. So I want to slice this entire area, but here's the problem. Any active layer will become part of your slice. So if I slice this right now, I would pick up the demo logo, the tagline, all of this navigational text would all get hard-coded in the image, and I certainly don't want that. So what you need to do is start figuring out where your layers are. And again, we made it really easy. Most PSDs you find are not going to be this well laid out. So we've done a really good job making it easy on you, but just know that when you get a PSD from a designer, they may not be labeled this nicely, they may not be organized this nicely. Typically, they won't be. These arrows next to these folders now, if I click this arrow next to the folder, it's going to basically open the group, open the folder, and show me all of the individual layers that are inside of it. We know that this area is in that group, again, because, oops, I take that back. It's not in that one either. It's not the topmost. It's in the lower area. So all of that content is in the lower area. Because I don't want to accidentally slice any of this blue color anyway, I'm going to turn that layer off, or that group off. I'm going to do the same thing for the gradient. I don't want that. I just want this granite looking image. So we know that it's inside of the header lower area. I'm going to click this arrow to expand. Now all of the individual layers that are inside of that group. And if you click it again, it basically puts it back to where we began. That's all I did. So now each one of these individual layers, again, like a cake, if I click the eye icon, you can see what it's going to turn off. It's not deleting anything, it's just hiding it. So clicking it back on brings it right back up. So I don't want that, and I don't want the tagline. And let's see, I don't want the nav bar. That's just the footer effect. See that? And I don't want the links, so that's gone. And if we scroll over to the right, did we get rid of everything? Looks like we did. This styled the line, which we want to actually keep for the graphic. And this was the actual background pattern that built that area. So now that we have everything turned off except for what we want to keep, the slicing begins. And this is how it works. The first thing we want to do is we want to go back to view, and we want to turn snap back on, and you'll understand why here in just a second. Now that we've got these guides set, we want to use them to force Photoshop to use them when we make these slices. No longer do we have to be really careful about what we're doing. We can be kind of quick and fast because it's going to snap right to these guides and use them when we slice. If you look at your left-hand bar down at the top, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The fifth selection down in your toolbar, it says it's the slice tool. And it may or may not show you as the slice tool, because if I right-click, you'll notice that it's also the crop tool, the slice tool, and the slice select tool. And by default, it will probably show the crop icon. So just start 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, down, right-click, and then you choose the slice tool. And you'll see that it's now activated. If I hover over the graphic, you'll see it becomes like the point of an art knife, which is the whole concept of an art knife and the slicing process. This is what slicing is. We are now going to use the guides because we have view snap properly set up. We're going to use the guides to slice this image out from everything else. So I'm going to left click somewhere near the corner of where these two, the vertical and the horizontal meet. And I'm going to click a little bit outside of the area. I don't have to be all that careful because you can see, and I let go early. We'll take a look at this. I created a slice. It's not the slice I wanted to create. I was concerned that left-hand line was outside of the image area, but you can see that it's snapped to it anyway, which is what the snap process, the snap functionality has on. Let me go ahead and clear slices. We'll start that again. We've got the slice tool on. We're going to left click here. We're going to just drag basically to the right until we get to the full width. We're also going to grab and go to the top. So once I get the area that looks like this, you can see that line that's showing up is properly positioned next to the guides. I'm going to let go. And doing so, if I scroll back to the left, you'll see that now there's these numbers that show up. There's a number 1, a number 2, a number 3, etc. We only wanted to slice this one area, but the slice tool has created multiple slices, and you'll see how that works here in just a second. Once the slice has been selected, basically, the next thing to do is to left click twice, double click inside of the image area that you sliced. So step 1, activate the slice. Well, step 1 is basically set up the guides where you want them. Make sure that view snap is on. Select the slice tool, use the guides to select the slice. Once it's selected, double click inside of the image area to get this slice options box. Here is where you want to name the image. So in this case, I'm just going to name it header main. We're not actually going to use any of these images. I've already got them all sliced and ready, but you'll get the idea. I'm going to name this image header main. You can name it anything that you want, anything that makes sense for you. Just go ahead and name the image. You'll also see it's giving you the dimensions. We know that we got the full width because you see that it's 1920 pixels in width. You'll also know that it's 166 pixels in height. Once that's done, I'm going to click OK. And now we've created our first slice. How we save this now is we go to File, Save for Web and Devices. You'll notice that there's multiple types of save inside of Photoshop: Standard Save, Save As, and Save for Web and Devices. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. That brings up this dialog box, the Save for Web and Devices dialog box. And this is where we need to start talking about image optimization. We can cause this image through Photoshop to be a JPEG. That's the default. We can cause it to be a GIF. We can cause it to be a PNG 8-bit, a PNG 24-bit, or even a Windows bitmap. Pay attention to something as we go through this process, and I'll show you here in just a second. I'm going to first choose a GIF image. It'll bring up the options for your GIF image. It's showing you right now it's trying to build that image from 256 colors. But down here in the left-hand area, you'll see that it says GIF, GIF. It's also telling you what that file size would be in that format. It would be 131.7 kilobytes. It's also going to give you a guesstimate as to how long it would take this image to display to your viewer if they were on an old dial-up modem, an old 56.6 kilobaud per second modem. It would take approximately 25 seconds for this one image to load. Now, you really don't have to worry about that. There's not a whole lot of people on dial-up anymore, but it is something to note. You do want to pay attention to your image types and to the file sizes when you build layouts and websites. Well, what happens if I select JPEG? Well, let's see. There's different quality levels. Let's start with 100 quality JPEG. Well, 100 quality JPEG, full quality, is actually a little bit smaller than the GIF. It's 125.7K, and it would render a second faster than the other. Well, if you want the image to be a JPEG, now, in regards to image optimization, when you hear people talk about optimizing images for the web, this is what they mean. Maybe you do want the image for some reason to be a JPEG, but you need it to be smaller than this such that it'll load faster. Well, you can start messing with the quality, and if I make it, a 70 quality, you'll see that we've just now dropped it to 48K. It's less than half. And our load time is improved dramatically to 10 seconds, but maybe that's not good enough. So you want to go to, I don't know, 47, and now you've got the image down to 26K, load time of 6 seconds, etc. There is a cause and effect, however, because as you go obviously lower in image quality, you are improving in file size and load time, but you are decreasing the quality of the image. It is wise to try a few different settings to try to get the sweet spot. You know, where does the image still look really good or plenty good enough, but yet optimize the file size as low as possible, because again, it's good for visitors, it's good for SEO, it's good for bandwidth. It's definitely a place where you want to spend just a little bit of time not moving ultra fast. But let's take a look at the PNG versions. PNG 8-bit, again, this is just 256 colors. You'll notice that it's 99K, so that's a whole lot better than what the GIF started out with, which was also 256 colors. It's going to take 19 seconds. And then the PNG 24 is going to be, you know, full color range. It's also going to be a much larger file. It says it's going to take longer. Quite honestly, I wouldn't worry about using this exactly as it is. I know that we talked about the GIF starting off right there too, but the quality of this is going to be a whole lot nicer. And of course, like I said, for me and my audience, they're not on dial-up modems. But that's what to pay attention to. If you wanted this to be a JPEG and you wanted the quality to be something lower that was going to give you a much lower file size, that's basically the way it's done. So I'm going to go ahead and just save this as a PNG 24, and we're going to save. It's going to bring up another dialog box for us. It's going to say, well, where do you want to save it to, obviously. And you'll also notice there's some other settings down here. Here's something that's strange, though. The file name isn't what we named it. We named it something with header in the title, but it's picking up the file name of the actual PSD. What you need to know is that you don't need to mess with this at all. It's kind of strange at first, but when it saves it, it's actually not going to save it with this name. It's actually going to save it with what we named it during the slicing process. The next thing is the save as type needs to be set to images only. You'll notice that it actually has the ability to actually create some HTML, Photoshop does, for the image. And you can play around with it just to see what it creates. But as far as this process is concerned, we want to control the HTML. We don't want to let Photoshop try to write HTML for us. We just want the image itself. Also, at the very bottom, in the slices options, you'll see that what slices do you want to save? All slices, user slices, or selected slices. As I told you when we initially sliced, even though we only made and named one slice, Photoshop actually made multiples, which is why we saw number 1, 2, and 3, etc. We don't want to save those additional slices. They're meaningless to us. We just want to save the selected slices. So again, slowing down here for a bit, we figure out where we want to save it on our machine. I'm already in the right place. We don't have to worry at all about the file name. We want to make sure that we're only saving an image, and we want to make sure that we're only saving a selected image. And once that's done, we can click Save. Now, what that's going to have done, if I open up the folder, it actually will create a folder named Images. Photoshop does this by default wherever you saved it. And if you double-click it, you'll see what it's done. It's created this header-main slice, this image that we can then use in our website project. So I just wanted to make note, when you save it and then you go, wait, where did it go? It automatically creates this images folder, and it places all of your sliced images inside of it. Okay? All right. Back to Photoshop we go. We've now saved the top slice. We're going to save this horizontal slice, and then I think we're just going to go start coding. The slicing process really is the same for this container area. It's just done vertically as opposed to horizontally, but we'll see. Depending upon, I think we're going to need to jump over to coding here pretty quick. But we'll slice this other thin repeating element just so you get the idea of what that looks like too. I'm going to go ahead and turn back on the top header area. We will turn, let's see, we'll turn on the elements that we turned off. We'll close the group so we look at it again like this. We'll turn on the gradient that's underneath this header image, and that's the next one that we're going to slice. We're going to slice this one vertically. So I now want to slice this thin gradient, and the question then becomes, well, how do I know when to stop? And here's the thing. We know that we coded the background color to be a light gray. It was E7, E7, E7. So first, let me clear my slices and get rid of those so we can look at this clean. I'm going to take the color dropper, the color picker again, and we're going to come over this area, and again, with making sure that only web colors is off. That's very important. I'm going to just click with the eyedropper tool down here, and we're going to take a look at the value. It's E7, E7, E7. Okay, that's good because that's the CSS color I'm using in the background to color the entire body area. So that part's already the same basically as the entire body area coded through CSS. I'll come up a little bit higher, and I'll click again and again and again and again. You see that value still staying the same, and again and again and again and again and again and again and again. Okay, now we've seen our first change. No longer is it E7, it's now E3. So I come down a little bit lower. Right about here is all I need for the image. Yes, I could slice it taller, but slicing the image taller then makes the file size larger, which makes the entire file size of the page bigger, and of course load time slower. So I don't want any more than is really necessary. Of course, you know, a few pixels here or there in height won't mess with anything, but you don't want to, you know, go cause this image to be overly long. It's just wasteful. So again, if I just use the color picker, I'll come get an idea as to where that change is. It looks like right in this area is safe. See where I'm at, 350 pixels right here is on the ruler. And then it changes about right there. It's actually even safe right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull down another, oops, close that box. I'm going to pull down another ruler and pull it down to where I think I was. I think I was about right there. I'm going to open up the color picker again, and I'm going to click right next to that guide and just make sure that it is still E7 to that point, and it is. So now what I want is I want to take a really thin slice vertically of this area so that I can repeat this image horizontally. I want that white line. I'll go ahead and toggle those off so you can see again. I want that thin white line, and I want it down to the bottom guide that I just set. So what I want to do now is we'll move this guide. Oops. I moved the image. I wasn't trying to move the image. Get off of that. I don't want to move the image. I want to move the guide. I want to make sure that I include that thin white line. So I'm going to go ahead and blow this up again so you can see it. And we'll turn snap to off so I can really finely control this guide. Get to just where I'm taking the white of that line, and I'm going to stop and leave it right there. I'm going to go ahead and zoom out just a little bit so you can see. We now want basically all of the content between these two new guides. I'm going to set some vertical guides now so we can slice between those. pulling vertical guides is the same as horizontal guides, except for you come from the vertical ruler. Left click, drag, and now you can stop it anywhere. It doesn't really matter. This image is the same across the entire width. And I'll pull another one. And generally speaking, the smaller your slices, the better. They typically look better, and of course the file size of the image is smaller. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger only because I want you to be able to see the slicing process. Just note that even a 1 pixel wide slice of this will work just fine. So now what I've done is I've set a guide to the top of the white line. I've set a guide to that bottom area, making sure that it was going to fade into the E7, E7, E7 color. And we've just set 2 horizontal guides just randomly so I can slice this area out. Go back to the slice tool. I'm going to click bottom. I'm going to drag up, and you see how that dashed line gets added. I'm going to go right there and release. Now it's created that area. I'm going to double click inside just like we did before with my left mouse, and I'm going to give it a name. This name, I'm going to make it the, I don't know, background. Actually, I think I named it the shadow repeater. It's a shadow and it repeats. So it's the shadow repeater. Again, the name is not important. You can see that it's telling me that the image is 6 pixels in width and it's 126 pixels in height. I click OK, and now that slice has been saved. Now we do the same thing. File, Save for Web and Devices, figure out what type of image we want. You can see as a JPEG 50, it's 351 bytes, load time of 1 second. If we go to PNG 24, it actually reduces this time the file size, even though the quality definitely went up. This is a full quality PNG 24 as opposed to a 50 quality JPEG, but we actually saved some file size, which is good. Here's another note. It's probably really hard for you to see on your screen, and I apologize for that. Let's see. I don't know if I've ever even tried to do this. Okay. Yeah, cool. Hopefully you can see that a little bit better. What this has done basically is you can see that slice is selected. There's kind of an orange line around it, and it's kind of colored. You see that slice has the blue number 3, or a blue background behind 03. All of the other slices are kind of like grayed out. If I go back to, we'll try 200%. I'll have to go back to 100%. And we'll just take a look at this. All these kind of look muted. The only thing that kind of looks vibrant is this one slice, and that's because that is our selected slice. It is possible to select or to slice multiple things or items at a time, and typically that's the way I would do it. I would set up all of my grids, make all of my slices, and save it all at once. I'm going through this process for you more slowly than I would, but if you do it that way, just note that there's something strange. Normally, with a computer, a PC, you typically hold down the Control key to try to select multiple items. With Photoshop, that's not true. You use the Shift key. So if I wanted to select this item up here, I would hold down the Shift key and click my left mouse, and you can see how now that area is no longer grayed out. That slice basically is now part of the selected slices, and I'll click it back off. If I click in this area now, you'll see how that area becomes vibrant, or this area, etc. So if you want to slice multiple items at a time, before you save it, use the Shift key and your left mouse to select whichever areas that you want to basically include in the selected slices. I'll go ahead and turn those off and just take it back to that repeater. Clicking Save now, we go through the same process again. Where do you want to save it? In that same place. Again, disregard the file name. It doesn't matter. Only images and only selected slices, and save. And I already have a shadow repeater in that area, and I don't want to replace it because the other one is good. So if I did, I would just replace it and we would be good. So with that, I think I'm pretty much done with the PSD, except for the fact that we'll at least talk about the slicing of the body. So if I was going to slice the top, the middle, and the bottom area of this image, because that's what we need to build this layout, basically here's what I would do. The first thing is I would set guides left and right. So again, with the understanding, let's go clear everything. Let's clear slices and let's clear guides. Okay, so if I turn on snap, here's a good thing to know, and I pull a guide out of the vertical, it's going to snap when it gets to, it's going to basically stop. You can see it kind of hang up right there. It kind of trips. And as it trips, it's basically telling you that's the center of the document. So I'm going to let it go. That's my exact center of this graphic. I can then take, and before we double clicked in this area to reset the rulers, well, now I'm going to left click and hold, and I'm going to drag it over to the guide. And when I release, you can see that now it sets the ruler to 0 right on the guide. So this is my 0 point. This is effective if you want to know or basically get to an even layout. So for that, here's what I mean. I'm going to do this relatively rough, but let's say that I wanted to make this 550 pixels over here. You can see that my guide is on 550 up here. If I pull another one and I go to 550, it's 550 over here. So I have basically equal spacing now on both sides of the container area. That's just one way to find the center point of a graphic and to get equal spacing. Should that be important when you go to slice? Of course, I don't need anywhere near that much extra space of this image. You would really want to use as little as possible, again, with the understanding that what you're really trying to do is make images that are as small as possible for file size and for load times. So clicking over here would take us down to 500 on both sides, which would make an image area. The total image area, including the additional space, would be 1,000 pixels in width, 500 pixels to the left, 500 pixels to the right. The other thing that you would do is to set a guide slightly above, and you would need, let me enlarge this again. And one thing to note, wherever you click on the magnifier, it enlarges that area more than others. So if you want to see this area, you would click the enlarging area up here. Oops, I don't want that high. As opposed to clicking somewhere else on the page. It tries to zoom in, not only zoom in, but zoom into that particular area. So the next thing you have to do is you want to pull another guide. We need it to be just tall enough to get around the full radius of this image. So you can start, I can take off snap now. We can start to kind of refine this, gotta be real tight there. We don't need, extra. And, how much can we get away with there? You want to be, kind of tight. So let's say it's about right there. Selecting that area would give us our top slice. So now we need a mid slice. And I'll do it down here only because there's no text in the way that I have to really turn off. But we'll put it like right here. And that's the reason I'm doing it here and not, say, across here, is now I'd have to turn off the text and the images in order to slice it. If I put it down here, there's nothing but just the guide. So if I take a teeny little thin slice of this section then repeats, as the content grows, it just keeps adding the image. And then we need another slice of the absolute bottom, which would include that shadow area that's hard to see. So if I turn off the footer, we can make sure that we get the shadowed area, and that looks like it would cut it off. That looks like it would pick it up. And then we need another slice of the the top getting, enough that it gets around that that radius again. So I'm not going to slice them, but I think you get the idea. I would slice out this area for the bottom, this thin slice that would be repeated vertically to cause the page to work, and then we'll also have this top slice. So this main content area gets built basically of those 3 images. So with those 3 images sliced, the main fixed header image sliced, and this repeater sliced, we have the ability to go code the main section of the page, because really we have all of the images that build up just the main content area. So I guess, Jerry, with that, I'm gonna let you hit me up with any questions just on the Photoshop side of things, just for just a minute or two, only because I want to close Photoshop and not reopen it.
Okay. Well, one person asked, what version are you using, just so Photoshop?
Good question. This is Photoshop CS4, which is not the latest. The very latest is 5.5, and it's what my wife has because graphics is her bread and butter. For me, typically, she or another provider does the graphics anymore, and then I handle the coding side of things, either myself or, of course, outsourcing it.
Okay. Let's see. So now, at this point that we're at, can you hit slice and then it'll slice all the areas and then save and name them? The 3 sections you just made?
Oh, yeah, we can, yeah, I won't use them, but yeah, we can do that real quick just to kind of show you how you would slice multiple things at a time. Yeah, so, okay, so the first thing I would do now that I've got guide set, I would make sure that we've got snap on, view snap, such that the slicing tool will snap to the guides. Turn the slicing tool on. We just very quickly click and drag until we get close. So we got that top slice, so double click inside of it, and we just basically name this with the name. So content BG top. Again, the name is unimportant. It's just important that you understand what it is. This is the content background, the top portion, and I would say okay. Come down a little bit more. It's going to be hard to see, but I'm just going to slice this thin area here. Probably going to have to blow it up in order to get inside of it with my, with my slice tool to name it. And we're going to name this one content BG mid. It's the middle portion. And we can go down some more. Let me zoom out. We'll go back to the slice tool and we'll grab this bottom portion. Again, you couldn't do it this way. What I'm doing, I'm just doing it kind of quick, because what you'll notice right now is I have the background on, and I don't want the background on. You would want the background off. So make sure that it will slice whatever you have on. Matter of fact, it would slice this gradient here too. So realistically, before you start, it should look like that before you go through the slicing process, because anything that you come across during your slice will be picked up in the image. So I slice this one last. I'm going to double click. I'm going to name this one content BG bottom, and we will OK that. So we just created 3 slices. We're not going to use them in the coding for the reasons I just pointed out, but you get the idea. If we go now to File, Save for Web and Devices, you're going to see something. Here's another thing that's just kind of weird with Photoshop. The area that I want to see is kind of hidden over here to the right, and how you kind of see it is you hold down your space bar to get the hand, and then you left click and kind of drag it around. So what I want now is I want this topmost section. I'm going to click inside of it, and you see that now it's got this orange line around it, which it didn't have before. I'm now going to hold down the space bar. I'm going to basically just start moving the page around so I can get to the other slice. This is where I said in order to select multiple slices at a time, you need to use the shift key. And you can also, if you need to, because their slices are tiny and you need to get inside of them to select them, like I showed you before, you can also magnify it that way. So I'm going to click or hold down my shift key, and I'm going to left click inside this area. You see that there's an orange line around it now. I'm going to hold down shift and click on the lower end, and now that you see we've got that highlighted as well. So all three of those slices are selected and nothing else. I'll go through the save process. Again, forgetting about the names, they'll come through fine. Making sure that we're only taking images and that we're only using the selected slices, and I'll click save. And that save process is done. If we go look at the images folder now, you'll see that we now have a content -background bottom, a content -background mid, and a content -background top. All three created, from one save, basically, because we sliced them at once and then we saved them at once. Okay? Is that good, Jerry?
That's good. All the other questions are basically, why do we slice? And I think that's going to be apparent as we move forward. Somebody's asking, why do you slice as opposed to just doing it in HTML?
Well, there's no way to do it in HTML. By that I mean, could I, use this entire image? Could I have basically just made this one big, image? Could I just have made one big image for the entire background and just dropped content on top of it? The answer is yes. From a technical standpoint, the problem is that the image size would be so huge that for those reasons it would take up way too much server resources. The file size would be way too long. It would load horribly, and it would basically be it would be horrible. Yes,
Right.
Jerry.
So we're basically taking a layout that was done in a graphic design and slicing out the small elements that we use to construct with in HTML to make the actual final website, which I think we'll see as we progress.
Yep. So
that's why we're mainly slicing, is to get these bits and pieces of graphics that we use, kind of like Lego building blocks that snap onto our content and layout.
right.
So that's why we're doing slicing. You can do an HTML page without doing any graphics. This just makes it look a lot nicer and what people are expecting.
Right, and we did that process in the last two parts, right? We started the mini site design completely 100% without any image usage whatsoever. It's just not possible with this particular layout. If you want this exact look, you have to use images, and if you're going to use images, you need to slice things or have someone slice it for you so that you can code it in a way that looks nice, but also it creates an intelligent page that's going to use a small file size that's going to render fast, which is, of course, beneficial for everybody. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of Photoshop altogether, and we're going to go talk about this page. All right. Again, we're going to start here. We're going to start just basically building it from the ground up and taking it to the point where it looks like this through nothing more than HTML, CSS, and the slices that we created. Or actually, I pre-created, but you'll see the process. I'm going to go ahead and open up Edit Plus, and we'll now open up the files. So I'm in part 1. I'm going to go ahead and let's take a look at the images folder first. Actually, I think that's going to be more helpful. Let me do this. Let's go look at the real images folder here. Okay. I should have pared these down. I apologize. So I've got all of the images here that make up the entire site, and I really don't need that. Let me, at the moment, get rid of those. Okay, as far as the actual content that we're going to lay out, we have the basically this is the images that we're going to use. actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it probably makes more sense to start from here. This top area again, this top horizontal band is not an image. It's a flat CSS color. This next image down here, this black granite looking thing that includes this thin line, is an image, and it is full width. If I right click and choose to view background image in Firefox, you'll see that that's the case. Of course, it's not 100% size. It's reducing the size, but you'll get an idea. It's one full entire image. If we go back, this gradient now, if I right click on this area and view background image, it's almost going to be impossible for you to see. It's over here. That entire area is actually shown to you by the use of nothing more than this one little teeny sliced image that's repeated horizontally. That's the benefit of slicing. That one teeny little file size makes the page load fast, and it makes the file size of the page small, but it still gives us the really pretty look of this entire gradient. Next, we have the top area of the content. If I choose View Background Image, it's hard to see, but you see just the top section of the background. I couldn't find you the mid slice probably. It's there. You just can't see it. It's only 1 pixel thickness, but it's just this tiny little thin slice of this middle area, and that tiny little thin slice is causing all of this white background to show up because it's just repeated now in the vertical or y-axis. Down here in the bottom, we only have one other image, and that's this bottom image, which is here and looks accordingly. The rest of this area is just called out as CSS colors, a flat color and then a color with a borderline on the top. So that entire look, which builds our entire kind of foundation for our full featured web page that's going to look like this, is really built with just those standard images that we just sliced out of Photoshop. So going back to Edit Plus, we're just going to go through the process of building it, kind of cut and paste dynamically to speed this up. So open up each of the indexes that I created. We'll also open up the style sheet, and we'll take a look at all of that. Okay, let's start with the style sheet for just a second. When you look at the style sheet, and of course you're going to get this when we hand everything out here probably by tomorrow, you're going to see something at the top. There's a CSS comment that says it resets the default browser CSS. We've talked already about the fact that there is browser-specific CSS that can control your content on your page if you allow it to. And what this does basically is it seeks to reset all of the HTML elements to basically remove all of the browser-specific stuff and basically let you, the web developer, start controlling everything on your side. There's a number of these online, but when you open up this document, you'll see that we are giving the attribution URL here. This was something created by Eric Meyer, not by us. And if you go to this URL, you'll see that he has, this is the more simplistic CSS reset, and he's got more complex ones as well. We're not going to discuss this for a whole long period of time, but just understand that what this does basically is it attempts to remove the browser-specific CSS to allow you to control it. For example, we talked about headings and the fact that the browser by default will always cause them to be bolded. Well, this basically sets the heading 1, the heading 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. It sets them to be normal weighted fonts rather than bold, etc. It sets the background for everything to be transparent, meaning no colors, to make no borders around anything, to add no margin or padding. So basically just undoes everything that the browser is trying to do to allow us to then control it. I just wanted to point out what that is. And that section from Eric basically is everything all the way down to the next CSS comment that you see that's right here for font. Okay, so when you see all of this gibberish at the top, just note that you don't have to actually create any of that. You can just go right over to Eric's website. It's available in open source. It's free to use, and you know, basically, if you're going to use it, I would recommend that you give Eric credit for it. But you simply just copy and paste it at the top of your documents, and that will basically zero out all the browser stuff, and then you can start developing from there. So realistically, we're not going to talk anymore about that section. We'll come back to this. When we look at index0.html, here's the entire page. We've got the doc type for XHTML. We have the head tag, which of course is the next element on an HTML page. We've got the body tag, and we've got the closing HTML. The only thing additional to this page basically is a couple things. Number one, we have included a link to the style.css file. In the last segment, we talked about external style sheets, and this has one. It's not contained in a CSS folder, but it has a style sheet, and we've linked to it. The only thing else additional that's custom is the div ID of wrapper. Now, I will tell you that this div ID wrapper doesn't do anything. There's no corresponding CSS for it in the document at all. So when you go looking for, hey, what's he asking it to do to the div ID of wrapper, you'll find out that there's nothing over here. I guess I just want to point out that you can set divs with classes or IDs and never actually define anything in your CSS. It's really only here to say that everything that we do custom is going to be wrapped or enclosed in this div ID of wrapper, only such that if we wanted to do something or style the wrapper later, we could. It's kind of just something that I've come about through experience. It's not something I can probably even really define overly well. If I took this div ID of wrapper completely away out of this structure, the page would still work perfectly, and that's maybe something that you want to play with when you get it. So the question then becomes, well, with this page, what does this page look like? Well, the page looks like this. This is index0.html. We are looking at this page live. The only thing that we're seeing is that there's this E7 light gray color in the background, and the reason that is because we are styling the body tag. Jump back over to the CSS, and we will see that we've styled the body tag to have a background of the E7, E7, E7 color. Okay? So that's all we've done in index 0. That's it. Index 1. In addition to the wrapper, I have now added a new division for the header, that head or top area of our page. Okay? You'll see that we've opened it with the div ID of header. Down here, I've left a comment that says basically that this is the closing div for that header. Remember that all divs have to be opened and closed. If you don't do that properly, your layout will get funky real fast. It'll start moving elements in all sorts of places that you don't want it to go. So if you ever see basically an issue with layouts, you want to go back and make sure that you double check all of your divs and make sure that every div you've opened is properly closed. Inside of the div header now, we have two additional divisions, header 1, which is here, and header 2. Okay, that's all we've added to the HTML. You notice that there's no inline CSS or anything else, but let's see. We go over to index 1, and now this is what happens as a result of adding that code, the HTML. Well, the question is, how did that happen? That happened through the CSS file. So going back to Edit Plus, let's take a look at the style.css file for header. So here's the thing. We've told the header to color the entire header area with that dark blue color. So basically what you can't see when looking at it in the browser is that this entire area is actually in the background, because HTML documents are basically layered kind of similar to Photoshop layers. This entire area is really that dark blue. You can't see it in this area because the image is sitting on the top of it, but that's what the code is telling it to do, to color the entire header division with the dark blue color. That's this CSS right there. The next says, okay, we have two divs or two header divisions inside of the main header, header 1 and header 2. What should I do with those? Well, the color all Fs basically says any text that shows up in that area, make it white, which is what all Fs is. Any text in that area, set the font size to 14 pixels. And the height of the header 1 area, the area that's being colored by this, is 50 pixels. And I thought I did it wrong, but I did it right. So initially when we opened up this document, I can see that the color it picked up is slightly different. But we said the header 1 color, we used the color dropper to find it. And again, it's slightly different than what the color dropper picked up when I did it live. But the height that we looked at in the guides is 50 pixels. What to do with header 2? Well, the header 2 now is this area underneath the band of color. And that's where the image comes into play. So in header 2, underneath the band of color, basically use a background image with a URL, or basically here's the path to it. It's inside of the images folder, and here's its name. We're actually using a header2.jpg. We're using the JPG, the JPEG version in this instance because a couple things. Number one, it doesn't need to be transparent. JPEG images can't be transparent, just so you know. Only GIF images and PNG images can have transparency to them. And number two, as we saw through the slicing process and the optimization process, the JPEG gave us the ability to have that image saved basically in the smallest format possible. So we did use a JPEG image for that main image because we wanted to optimize the file size. Now here's something that's kind of weird. You see background repeat, and then it's set to repeat X. Well, that's kind of weird. It's one huge image. Why would you try to repeat that huge image? And the only reason is basically this. If you have a user that tried to put your website on a big flat screen monitor that isn't a typical monitor, it would still repeat the image. It wouldn't be beautiful because it's not, like I said, that image is not one that can tile left to right seamlessly, but at least it would fill the area because of the repeat X functionality. If you didn't do that, if you had a user view your website on a really large monitor, the image would only be 1920 pixels in width, and it would kind of cut off on the left and right. So most anybody will never see the repeated image because, again, we've used an image that's 1920 pixels in width, and the widest monitor right now for a regular computer is that resolution. The height value is set to the height of the actual image itself, so that's where that value is coming from. Just check your image, figure out what the height is, and then set the height value appropriately. Okay, and that's it. That entire CSS right there in this block, along with the HTML from index 1, will show you this. Okay, and I built these in individual building blocks basically such that when you look at them, and we're giving them to you in these individual segments so that you can kind of just follow along with the process, you'll see what the result was. The next result we're going to is basically the addition of the gradient that repeats horizontally and the top and middle section of the content area. So let's take a look at that. That's in index 2. What we've added in the HTML now is we've added this area, the div with an ID of main body. And you can see again that I've opened the div here and I've given you a comment code that shows you that I've closed the div here. So inside of the main body division or div, we've got a couple of new divs. We have a div with a class of content, a div with a class of BG top, and you can see that that one's closed, opened and closed on the same line. The entire opening and closing tag for that div is right there highlighted. All that's doing is outputting that top rounded cornered image. That's all that particular div is doing. We have a div with a class of BG-mid. This is that mid area that has that repeated image that repeats vertically, and all of the content then that's added inside of the div with a class of BG-mid basically shows up on the page. I currently have a paragraph here that I've commented out, which is what that's referred to. I've started a HTML comment over here. I ended it over here to basically cause this information not to show up for the moment. But when we're done, I'll put it back and show you where it appears on the page. So again, each one of these divs needs to be closed, and I've given you an indication as to which it's closing. So this one closes a div with an ID of background mid, which is this one. This one closes a div with a class, because the period, of content, which is this one. And this one closes the main body. You notice that there's not an additional close for the BG top because it is right there. And typically when it's right behind it, I don't add the comment because it's pretty apparent what it closed. So let's go take a look at it. What now is happening with main body, div class of content, BG top, BG mid? Go back to CSS. All right, so in the main body area, it says to use a background image, and that's that shadow repeater, that vertical slice that is causing that shadow to appear. You can see that we're repeating it only in the x-axis or horizontally. All right, underneath the class of content right here, anytime it's found inside of the div with an ID of main body, what is it supposed to do? Well, it's supposed to set the entire width to 978 pixels, which happens to be the full width of the sliced images. You might say, well, wait a minute, I thought this was 960. The content area itself follows the 960 grid, but the image that surrounds it is slightly wider than that. In this case, it's exactly 978 pixels wide. So that's why there's a variation or a difference between the 960 and the 978. We've set margins of 0, again, if using two values, 0 for the top and bottom, auto for the left and right. What this is doing, again, is centering the content on the page. If you use margin 0 auto to center content, please note that you do have to define a width. Without the width statement, the browser wouldn't know how to center this because it's based on the actual viewer's window size or screen size. So for my monitor that's 1600 pixels wide, it says, okay, take 1600, subtract 978, divide it by 2, and that's what the auto value becomes. If your monitor is 1920 or 1024, it just does the math, but it has to be based on a specific width value. And it says to add some padding or some extra space just to the top of 20 pixels. Okay. Lower down, we have the three images. Right now, we've only added CSS or added HTML rather that's calling out the first two. The background top, again, it's the same width as the main. It's using the body top image, that top image that has the radius corners. In this case, we don't want it to repeat. So we've set it to no repeat. We don't want it to replicate itself. It's just fixed. The thing that replicates is that middle slice, and we want it to repeat in the y-axis, the vertical. You'll see here that there's a new value that we haven't talked about before in CSS called min-height for minimum height. And we're saying that basically make sure that that area, even if there's no content in it, is at least 500 pixels in height. This is completely subjective. Your value you might want for your site would be more or less. I'm just pointing it out so that you understand what that is. Without a min height value, if I comment this out through CSS, done like that again, basically just wrapping that area in a CSS comment tag, again, / ****, and I save this. When we go look at, I think we're on index 2, right here, you're going to see this issue. It doesn't know what to do with it because at the moment I don't have any content in that area. If I added content, it would start to grow again. But since we've added the minimum height to that area, it says, hey, expand that area to be at least 500 pixels, regardless of whether any content has been added to it or not. Putting that back and reviewing it sets the page back to this. That minimum height again of 500 pixels is set by that value. Okay. Next, let's go to 3. In 3 now, we've got the rest of the page. We've got the bottom section, and we have the footer areas. Okay, so we'll go take a look at it real quick. First in HTML. We now have everything that's inside of the footer div, which is right here, added to the page. You can see that we've got a main div of footer, and just like the header, we have 2 additional divs inside or nested inside of it. We've got the div with an ID of footer 1, which is closed here, and then we've got a div with an ID of footer 2, which is closed here. And that's giving us the ability to style those 2 different areas differently. The only other thing to note is because of the particular styling of this page, we'll go back here and take a look at footer 3. If I decided not to be so tricky and to stop this rounded corner above the footer, this area would look a little bit differently. Because I want this image to overlap, basically part of that footer band of color that's going behind it, is the reason why this HTML is built the way it is. You'll see that the image for the background top and mid are up in the main body division, but yet the bottom actually comes inside of the footer div. And the reason, again, is because of where I have decided to stop that image. If you want to play around with it, what you can do is basically take this, and for the moment you can cut it out, and you could put it basically, let's see, where would it need to go? It's probably, we'll find out here. I haven't actually played with this. We'll put it here, and if it's not in the right place, we'll move it. Sometimes things just need to be played with, but it's the right place. So you'll see if I wanted my layout to look like this now, where the background image no longer overlapped that container area, just moving that one HTML element will change the layout. I think it looks just kind of like a little bit cooler because it's something that you don't just like typically see in the original placing. So that's basically what moving that element, that particular div, does. And let's see, we were right here. So we've opened the footer div. Again, we have a footer1 div inside of it. That div class with bg-bottom, again, all it does is position that particular bottom part of the background image. And then we've got a div with a class of content inside of each. So basically an area where we can put content inside of the footer area. And we'll get to that more next time. Anyway, when you look at this, the question is, what do we do with the styling? Let's go take a look at the CSS. We're styling for the footer ID of div. Div with an ID of footer1 and footer2 primarily is what's going on. So we just look for the appropriate code, and again, we've left you really clear understanding in your comments as to where to find it. The footer div, right now, there's no CSS attached to it whatsoever. So leaving this here is really subjective for additional stuff in the future, but you could get rid of this altogether. There's no styles being used. The footer1, however, that top band, it's saying for it to be a minimum height of 300 pixels. It can grow taller than that, but be a minimum height of 300 pixels. What color should it be? Well, it should be this dark gray, 252525. And we want it to have a border on the bottom that is 1 pixel wide, very thin. It's a solid line, and it's in this particular color. Going back to the layout, we will see that it's this borderline is what's being used to create this nice little effect that separates between the two footer colors. Footer1 content, this is basically just setting, what width is the content area of that full footer1 area. What color should the text be, which is a gray color if content is added to that area. Footer2, the height should be fixed at 80 pixels. The background color is a darker, almost pure black. And in this case, it has a border top. So there's actually two different borders that are being smooshed together basically to cause this effect. A darker one and then a somewhat lighter one. This is also a border top of 1 pixel solid with this particular color. And then again, there's information about the footer2 content, any content that's placed inside of the lower footer area. And that in its entirety is making up this page exactly as we see it. Again, we've made up this entire thing now with a CSS color, one full image, a repeating image horizontally, 3 images for the background, the body, one fixed of the top, a repeated thin slice through the mid, one fixed at the bottom, and then the bottom area is completely CSS colors. And again, before we stop this and take questions, one of the cool things, besides lowering the file sizes, besides improving load times, improving SEO, etc., because of load times, of using the CSS as much as possible, is the ability to change things just at a whim. So if for whatever reason in the footer area you say, you know what, no longer do I want this particular color in that area, I want that color to be dark red, and I want the lowest area to be, this is going to be ugly, but you get the idea. I'm just using a CSS color name as opposed to a hexadecimal. Save that, and just rapidly on the fly now, that footer area is going to become red on the top, and it's going to become blue on the bottom, and voila, you can see that has occurred. So I think I'm done with that, Jerry.
Just wanted to point out the if you scroll down to the footer again, you can see how the shadow appears. It's a little hard to see normally with the black. You see how the slice had the shadow that's now lying over the red. Gives it a little bit better appearance. Just a go-to webinar issue.